What's going on out there in podcast land? This is the best damn wrestling podcast. Keith and man, it's been a long time.
Man, it's been a damn eternity. It's been like the eternal damnation sleep. We've been hibernating for the past few months.
Yeah.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think we owe a lot of apologies to a lot of people. But, I mean, before we get started, a serious note, I hope that everybody like us is trying to find a way to navigate all the shit that's going on. I know that's part of the reason we have not been able to do anything. And, I mean, hopefully we can give you something to listen to get you through all the shit that's going on. It seems like the world's going to hell. And, hell, just being able to talk about wrestling and get a release is awesome. So for all of y'all out there that are listening, thank you for continuing to listen to us. For first time listeners, we welcome you. Check out all the rest of our stuff, and hopefully today's show is good and we can give you something to take your mind off everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're doing the Chris Benoit 2-part series from Dark Side of the Ring that's kicked off this last season. To me, the second season of Dark Side of the Ring was better than the first. I didn't think that was possible, but it damn sure it happened. And they kicked it off with a bang with Chris Benoit and a two-part event or whatnot, highlighting his rise and then obviously the inevitable suicide and things. Before we get to talking about this, we do want to put a disclaimer out. You know, we will be talking about the things that transpire in the documentary, but I mean, obviously, some of these things we don't condone and don't, there are some parts in here that are very disturbing, but we'll discuss it nonetheless. Man, what did you think? I'm a huge, and I know, people are gonna say, "Oh, you can't take away from the guy's work." I'm a huge wrestling fan of Chris Benoit, the wrestler. What he did was unforgivable, but his work, his body of work as a wrestler, Chris Benoit as a wrestler, I can't stress this enough, as a wrestler was one of my all-time favorites. All-time favorites. So to watch this and get to see it brought back a lot of memories for me. They started off with his time in New Japan and how he met Eddie Guerrero there and basically their relationship. That was what the first part was about. And you could always tell that there was a bit of a chemistry there with them because they had great matches. No matter what promotion they were in, I don't know if you ever saw it, but did you ever see the last match between Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit in ECW?
No, I never watched that one.
Great match. Yeah, I mean, they were fucking technically sound, wrestled great.
That was before they went to WCW, right? That was when they were leaving.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's when they were
leaving. I remember seeing highlights.
Yeah, great match. And then when they got to WCW, obviously they were in the cruiserweight division at that time, but great matches, great technical matches. Chris Benoit to me was always more physical than everybody else. It looked like when he hit you very hard. When he suplexed you very hard. Everything about him was so intense and
like real.
Top. Yes, and that's what made him awesome. And they talk about that, whatnot, and how his relationship with Eddie Guerrero was, and how they became friends over time from just locking up and respecting each other's craft in the first part of the series. And they also, talk about how in the process of that, they also end up discussing Nancy Benoit, Chris Benoit's wife, who was killed in the unfortunate accident, and how, previously she was married to Kevin Sullivan and she was woman. Now, how much do you know about women?
Oh man, I knew her as woman. I always saw her with people in WCW. I don't remember seeing her in WWE. I don't think she ever appeared in WWE.
No.
But I always saw her in WCW, so I was very familiar with seeing her. I thought she did a great job of getting her character over. I always thought she was like this psychotic woman. You know what I'm saying? I always remember her with Kevin Sullivan, and that was back when he had the dungeon. I think
Yeah,
that's the name of
yeah,
his faction,
yeah, it
and I
was.
remember her.
And I thought it was a cool spot that when they were talking about her life and how she got into the wrestling business and met Kevin Sullivan, that she was so over and what she did, what people believed that wrestling was real back then. She would be pumping her gas. Her sister said she would be at the gas station and people would come over in these southern states and stuff where she was at, offer to pray for her and stuff like that because they really thought she was possessed. She was over,
Yeah, that's
you
how
know.
good she was.
And so over that in some circles and stuff, people think she should be in the Hall of Fame. She never had to wrestle a match. She was just over as a valet.
But she was
Oh,
around that time where you had Miss Elizabeth and Sonny, and you had her.
yep.
And from time to time, Luna Vachon, but Luna Vachon was also a wrestler. But I remember Woman being one of the top valets along with Sister Sherry and Miss Elizabeth in
No,
WCW. She did her thing.
nothing to top Miss Elizabeth, but I mean, she was pretty. Some people say she's the best ever. I don't know. I
I
think
think it just depends on what your role was if you were the best
Macho
at
Man
that.
Randy Savage is one of the top 5 wrestlers of all time. To me, Miss Elizabeth made that. But I mean, Kevin Sullivan was all he wasn't a Macho Man Randy Savage, but hell, she was with the Four Horsemen at one point in time, and that was like
Yeah.
in the early '90s, like early '90s or whatnot. But like hell, she was over. Like she was definitely over. And I thought it was cool how they talked about that and how she met Kevin Sullivan and everything that went with that or whatnot. And the first episode is basically just their early lives, how they end up, Chris Benoit and her end up meeting or
Getting in an
whatnot.
entanglement.
Well, I mean, I guess you can't even call it an entanglement at this point, but uh, man, they basically met in a art imitating life situation. Because remember, Kevin Sullivan, I think Kevin Sullivan was really high on Chris Benoit, like a lot of people were when he
Right.
came for, so he was really high on him, and he put him in an angle because Kevin Sullivan was booking at the time, and an angle with him where he actually stole woman
His
from
wife.
him.
Yeah.
You're right, and that became an actual thing. Now, during the course of this documentary, they also begin to touch on in the first part because we're covering the first part right this second. They begin to touch on that over time Kevin Sullivan and Nancy Benoit had issues or whatnot, and I thought it was interesting that Kevin Sullivan was never in the documentary. And it sucked for me because it would have been interesting to hear his side of the story as these things are transpiring. Because according to the documentary, Chris Benoit and Nancy Benoit got together, but after she began to tell him how abusive Kevin Sullivan was or
Hmm.
had been allegedly, or whatnot, and that is kind of where that took off from. And you have her sister telling this story from her perspective. Like, yeah, she told me this happened and that happened. And I love Kevin Sullivan, and I hate that he didn't get a chance to really expound on what transpired. But I will do a plug-in if you ever are interested and you've seen this and you want to know Kevin Sullivan's side. Remember, Kevin Sullivan, shortly after this premiere, did a full sit down with Jim Cornette on the Jim Cornette Experience and discussed why he wasn't in the documentary and gave his version of events and where he was and what happened. But and that was really good. But they
Yeah, it
go
was.
on to talk. Yeah, they go on to talk about how eventually like there was you know, it got so bad that there was a dust up in the ring. Apparently, they say that it kind of came to a head when Kevin Sullivan and Benoit tried to shoot on each other in a match, and
At
I think,
Halloween Havoc. Yeah, they
yeah,
were really throwing some potatoes in that one.
right, right. But of course, I think if you go back and listen to Kevin Sullivan tell Jim Cornette, that was the whole point. It was never on, you know, oh, you stole my wife type of thing. It was more of a, we wanted it to look like that because that was the angle they were pushing. So that's what I'm saying. It was so much give and take, but that's how that the story of how they got together was even, very interesting
Right.
or whatnot. And so when
It's
they
like
talked
something
about,
out of a movie, kind of.
well, apparently, man, if you do some digging, and I don't know how true or not true this is. Obviously, nobody was there, but where I think I heard this on. Oh, god damn it! I think I want to say on something to wrestle with Bruce Pritchard when the Radicals came in. I think it's on the Radicals episode when they tried to all come in. They told them if I think Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, they told them, hey, if you won't take us, at least take Chris Benoit because he's here. Because if you recall, Benoit and people don't talk about it. Chris Benoit became WCW champion at one point. They put
Right.
the belt on him. And around that same time, they told him, hey, at least take him because Kevin Sullivan is going to make his life hell because he stole his wife or whatever. That's but allegedly, that's the story that floated around and whatnot. I believe it's on something to wrestle with. But that whole element was interesting. And then if you do some digger deeping, god
Digger deep,
damn
man.
it.
I was gonna
Yeah,
let you roll with it too.
yeah, what the fuck, it's so much to this. I mean, you hear all kinds of crazy shit, like Kevin Sullivan was the one that actually, killed them all or what. And it's bullshit, but at the same time, like everything that happened from that point on kind of surrounded this particular set of things. And I thought it was so important that they pointed that out first while they're displaying his body of work and how he started in the business and how good he really was coming out of. Because remember, Chris Benoit came out of Canada, and
Yeah.
how good he was. This was almost as important. I think it took up a nice chunk of the episode to get to this point to lay the foundation. And
Right.
so, of course, the first episode touches on those things, and it touches on, like I said, his relationship with Eddie Guerrero and how that blossomed into something, and how over time he became a really, really, really good. I mean, Chris Benoit was really good when he was in the Four Horsemen with Ric Flair and Dean Malenko and Arn Anderson and Steve McMichael. I love the Four Horsemen. I still say to this day, Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit is one of the greatest technical tag teams I've ever seen. They were very good.
Well, the fact that they even put him in the Four Horsemen said a lot. That's
Well, I
that's
think they wanted him in the Four Horsemen. It was requested.
right. And he lived up to it. He lived up to it, and you had to because this was a Four Horsemen group that you remember they had Steve Mongo McMichael in there
Yep.
with his no wrestling ass.
Yep.
So
Yep.
they had to make up for a lot, and they did their thing. Dean Malenko, man of 1,000 holes, he lived up to it. Always had a great match, and Chris Benoit was the muscle. He was the crazy short guy that
But
was
for
kind
their
of muscular.
size, they always seem to wrestle larger than life for their size. They always seem to wrestle
Yeah.
larger than life for
But
their
they were able
size.
to break them down too. That's what made it so good about them. The both of
Yep.
them were very technically sound, and they could break down anybody. They went against some of everybody, and they broke them all down and made it a good match.
Yeah, and so I mean, just they talked about how great he was as a wrestler. The first episode kind of didn't really dive into the main issue, or the main thing of obviously the death or whatnot. I also thought it was really interesting how his son told his side of the story. He added a very human element to Chris Benoit because
Hmm.
for me personally, as a fan of his and as a viewer, I was when I seen this guy, the last thing I thought was, oh, like he has a kid and he's very, he's very nice and he's very. It was like this guy will kill you. He will hurt you. I thought the crossface crippler was the most painful hole anybody could ever because he did it with such intensity and
Yeah.
and, and that flying headbutt. But his son kind of really gave you a inside view into, hey, this was my dad and this is how he was and this is how I grew. Even with his youngest son that died or whatnot in that incident, you seen the side of Chris Benoit that if you never knew him off camera, you would have been very surprised. Because you got to remember, when Chris Benoit was real big and stuff, we were kids, man. We were like 10, 11, 12, you know. I
Yeah,
never
when he was
knew.
first coming back, well, first coming into WWE, yeah, like
Well,
around
I
10
think,
or so.
yeah, I think when he won the title, we couldn't have been more than what, 13, 14?
At WrestleMania 20, yeah,
Yeah,
14, 14.
yeah, like, yeah. So I mean, yeah, that's that's what I'm saying. That's crazy.
Yeah.
You know,
See,
to think
me
that.
myself, I was never really a fan of Chris Benoit. I mean, I respect the way he did in the ring, but I just couldn't get into him because I guess his character was so good that I really didn't like him. Period. But I just remember not really liking him. Not really liking his matches. This is before I really got into the whole broad spectrum of wrestling, or
Yeah, the
understanding how it.
intricacies of it,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I was just into like, okay, let's see some shit. Some people get hit with it, like the stuff people like now. That's how I was back then. I was like, let's get into some people getting hit with chairs, getting put through tables and stuff. I don't care about this stuff, and that's where I was. But he was very good at what he did. Always told a great story. I knew when he was walking into a match, even though I wasn't a fan of him, I knew he was going to be a problem. Like in that very first Money in the Bank match. Oh my gosh. If you go back and look at that, man, this dude put it all on the line. That diving headbutt he did on Kane or whatever, and he busted himself open. Man,
He
dude really
had,
left it out there.
yeah, I mean, he was tremendous.
He was.
Yeah, I don't, and towards the end of this episode, we'll touch on something, about that, and as far as his work, but going back to the actual documentary or whatnot, that, like I say, that first full episode was an hour long, and it touched on basically his early life. And side note here, did, did you get the vibe that this kind of was almost like a documentary about Eddie Guerrero and Chris
Yeah,
Benoit?
in that spot. Yeah. But then as we got into the second part, I understood why they did that. Because I was like, wait, they're spending like a good chunk of time on Eddie, but it was so important to the story for them to establish that and to go in
And,
depth to it.
right. And towards the end of that episode, they talked about how they were so tight and they traveled together. I think, matter of fact, they said Chris Benoit, that was the only guy he would really even talk to or do
Right.
anything with in WWE or whatnot. They worked out together. And then, Eddie Guerrero got Chris Benoit to be, religiously involved. He
Mm-hmm.
gave him, I thought the significance of that Bible was very important. And it turned out to be, in the second episode, he gave him a Bible, and Chris Benoit carried that everywhere with him. And and it kind of, did it actually hit home to you or resonate? Hey, maybe that's why they both won the titles that same night.
That definitely resonated with me why they were so emotional and why they allowed Eddie to go out there and congratulate Chris, even though they were on opposing shows. So yeah, it definitely put a lot of things into perspective that I hadn't thought about initially uh, concerning those two. Like yeah, I knew they were close, but I didn't know they were like that close.
That close.
Like
Yeah, it was
almost.
almost like it was almost like that one needed the other to make it. And as the episode goes on, they make it seem like without Eddie Guerrero being there, Chris Benoit may very well have went off the rails a whole lot sooner. It was
So
almost
yeah,
like he had to be there. And I don't know if that it was like that they tried to, they did a very good job to me of showing like this symbiotic relationship between the two, like one needed the other, or one relied on the other so much that if one's gone, the balance is thrown completely
yeah,
off.
it was almost like twin brothers or something.
Right. Right, and that was I think Vicky Guerrero did a great job. She was the one that kind of really explained that, her and Nancy's sister, that, hey, this was because at first they hated each other, and Eddie Guerrero used to always, he thought Chris Benoit was an asshole and shit like that. I think she said that he would come home and complain about him. But over time, he started to really respect his work. And then they both came up through the ranks together in WCW. And they were drastically undervalued. If those guys had stayed and people had seen their true value, WCW may still be in business today. And it's not just them. It's Chris Jericho. It's, Booker T. It's so many dudes that didn't realize what they had. Rey Mysterio turned out to be a world champion, or whatnot. They had all of these people there, and they never, these guys, they were your workhorses. If you look at it, Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko and Chris Jericho and even Booker T when he was TV champ, and these were workhorses. So these guys worked. They worked quite often. And if you notice, they never had they would do 5 to 10 minute or 8-minute matches, and they were supposed to be undercards, but their work rate was tremendous. They were all workers, great workers. And
yeah, they would give them like filler matches, and
yeah,
it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Giving them filler matches. They're having the most holes, while some matches didn't have more than 6 holes. They matches were full of holes and different transitions into, like, the psychology was different than other stuff. Their psychology, I think that's the best way to describe them. Their psychologically, they were on a whole nother level. They were out of this world. And I think that comes from when we're talking about like Chris and Eddie. Both of them were huge perfectionists. They're notorious for really being hard on themselves when something doesn't go right in the match, and they even
talked about that. Yeah, he did that. How he would say, he would basically punish himself for fucking up a spot. The match would be almost immaculate, but man, I fucked that spot up. That won't ever happen again. He was a perfectionist, and I think that translated to his work. That's what made him such a good champion. And the fact that people don't realize he was a champion in 2 major promotions, like, that should resonate. The guy he mastered his craft. That is what he mastered, his craft. Everything about him was perfection. I never saw him have a bad spot, make a bad move, do a bad hole. He was perfection personified. He was perfection. And
it was smooth.
Yeah, and so was Eddie Guerrero. And again, that's what that first episode did such a good job of showing that, and it drew you in, because it basically, by the time you got to the end of the first episode, you were so tied into their relationship where they finally tell him about Chris, when they finally get to the part about Eddie Guerrero dying, and then how Chris Benoit found out. And you know what? To this day, I never really even noticed until I watched the episode when they did the 10 bell ring call for Eddie Guerrero. I never really knew or noticed how broken Chris Benoit was about that whole thing. And I didn't even see, man, that I can remember, because it happened so long ago. I think I was just in shock that Eddie Guerrero had died. And I remember thinking when he died, man, he finally made it, and then he dies. Like, he became champion or whatnot. It was almost like a changing of the guard when him and Chris Benoit became champion. Because up until that time, guys like that didn't become the guy. They were the guy. And I was in such shock, I didn't even notice. They showed on the documentary how they asked him to give like a basically like a little side interview or
like they usually do,
right, or condolences,
tribute.
And he couldn't do it.
Yeah, he couldn't make it through. That was like, that threw me for a loop, because I remember when the episode initially came on and stuff, and I saw Chris Benoit. I was like, wow. At this time, I didn't know that they were even close, because this is still age of kayfabe and stuff like that.
Right.
Eddie was a heel at this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, man, I remember Triple H just kind of consoling Chris, but he was just like losing it, man. More than Chavo and Ray, Chris was losing it like bad. And when he had his interview and his time to pay a verbal tribute to Eddie, man, he just you could tell to just so much was missing from him. And then
I think I
he pulled himself together to go out and have a match with Triple H later that night. Still, I was like, how did he do that?
I think he never should have. They shouldn't have asked him to do that. It's almost like the same thing with Pillman's wife when he died and they asked her to get on air. You know,
Yeah,
they
that
never
was
should have.
insensitive.
Yeah, they never should have asked him. They'd have came out better asking his nephew or Rey Mysterio. I think you could look at him in that moment and it kind of highlighted. It was almost like that last little grip on whatever was left of his sanity. That was it. That
Yeah,
was it.
I think they probably didn't know because he one of the other main focal points was the fact that they said he was to himself. He didn't really talk to a lot of people, so he was
Yeah.
very quiet. So he was probably all to himself, and they was just like, "Hey, can you come here and say some things about Eddie, stuff like that? Do you want to wrestle tonight? Yeah, sure, I'll do all that." And it just turned out worse than they thought because it was, man, that was just a tough time. That out of all the deaths in wrestling I've witnessed, Eddie Guerrero's is probably the hardest one because that was just I loved Eddie at that time out, and he was very
Everybody
entertaining.
did. Even as a heel, he still because I think that when he died, he was doing that feud with Rey
Batista,
Mysterio with the
yeah,
was it what yeah, I thought it
he
was
was
Rey
slow
Mysterio and
burning for a feud with Batista.
okay. Yeah, but he had gotten over. I mean, JBL that I think the thing with him and JBL put him on the map and
Oh
then
yeah,
he just took off. And it was
yeah,
like this was his time. He would have been a great long-term top guy to me. He was already there, but after he won a title, it solidified him to me. You know, it's the same thing with Benoit. After he became world champion, it solidified him to me. I didn't have to question it. I know at first when I was like, can I see them being champion? And to me, they opened the door for so many other unlikely guys to be champion. Rey
right.
Mysterio becoming champion, I think, was a direct result of Eddie Guerrero being champion first and then him dying. You know,
Yeah, that's
but yeah,
yeah, obviously. I mean, and this was coming off Eddie Guerrero's best year professionally, man.
yep,
He was having a hell of a year. This was the same year he did the custody of Dominic thing, man.
yep.
The I'm your poppy stuff. Like I'm still about to get one of those T-shirts. That
He
that
was
was the
great,
best.
and I mean, I think they end the first episode with basically that, and like how from there it just gets worse.
Hmm.
And you go into the second part of that episode or whatnot the following week, and they kind of just pick up where they left off. And his sister-in-law, his wife's sister, talks about him being Chris Benoit. Talks about how they started noticing he became so off put. When
Hmm.
he just kind of pushed into himself or whatnot, went deeper in. He stopped talking, and then he changed. And then at one point in time, didn't they say something along the lines of he would write letters to Eddie Guerrero? Like everything was
Yeah.
about Eddie Guerrero. He started writing letters, even though he was dead, telling them how he felt, or whatnot. And it was almost like at that point in time, I'm watching that part, and I'm like, nope. I mean, it's kind of like everybody was concerned, but nobody was. They thought he was grieving, but
Right. They
it's
thought it was helping him keeping a journal. They thought it would help.
and
I
then
think it just made things
somewhere
worse.
along, yeah, exactly. Because somewhere along the way in that episode, I think they talked about how all of a sudden he and his wife started having domestic issues, or
Yeah.
whatnot. And yeah, and that I don't, and then that became they. I think that became a like a harbinger of them talking about him having roid rage, which which was a precursor to what ended up happening or whatnot. And I mean, I it's funny to me because I never really looking back on it then. I never really thought, oh damn, Chris Benoit is a pretty big dude. So was Eddie Guerrero. You know,
Right.
I never I never really put two and two together. But watching this documentary, I'm like, oh, okay, I
Yeah, I
can see
noticed
that.
how big Eddie had gotten, but I did it like you wouldn't harp on it for too long because him and Chris were very athletic. They were still able to
Yeah,
go
exactly.
on top of to the top rope and do their German suplexes and all that stuff. So it really didn't catch your eye too much. Just like, oh, they're really buff. They're in great shape.
And they were before this though. They were gym freaks,
Yeah.
But it's like and let me ask you a question. So to a degree, would you say that the fault for them dying and the roid rage and obviously Eddie Guerrero had a heart attack, which I think it was a contributing factor to what he was
Years
taking
of
was a
drug
contrib-
abuse.
right, exactly. Do you think that some of that would have been on the WWE and the pressure they put on a lot of those guys, that if you wanted to be a top guy, you wanted to get over, you had to look a certain way?
I'm
Is that possible?
I'm a agree with you and stay in that same ballpark and elaborate a little more. I think along with that, I think it's their work schedule too. If Chris would have had the opportunity to grieve like he needed to and not be on that hectic schedule where he's only home for like 2 days out of the week and on a constant go where you have to pretty much psych yourself out and be at the top and maintain your spot, I think he would have been in a better space for his family and for himself. So I
Right.
definitely think WWE has some definite uh, blame in this thing because that, along with their expectations of people and not giving the small guy the right opportunity, that I definitely think it's their fault
Well, I
because it's
wouldn't.
not like how it is today.
I wouldn't say it's their fault per se. I'd say that there was a contribution of, hey, if you want to stay on top, and I think to be honest with you, I think that's just a wrestling adage. Like, most people wrestle hurt or never go home because they don't want to lose.
Lose their spot.
Right, and I don't
Yeah.
care what promotion necessarily. Say I wouldn't say per se WWE, but the reason I asked the question about the size thing is because if you everything that you've ever listened to about anybody, why they weren't champion, why they what they could have been or whatever, the biggest thing was size. The story about Chris Jericho putting lifters in his shoes to seem taller so that Vince McMahon would like him, or there was a point in time where Rick Rude they didn't feel he looked a certain way apparently, and that's when he got bigger because he wanted to be champion, or we've heard all the stories, or whatnot of why guys that should have been weren't, and why guys that were champion or the top guy got top spots were. Size has always been a thing, or whatnot. You had to have a look. Hell, they're still fucking doing it. The
Yeah.
reason Finn Balor or guys like that aren't champion is because they don't feel they fit the bill or they look the part to be champion. It's not about ability, it's about appearance. So that's why I was like, well, hey, would you call that a catalyst for some of these things, or but that was just a sidebar because they start talking about this stuff, and it was like, well, obviously the guy felt pressured to do steroids because why the hell would a perfectly fit athlete that was in tip top shape for most of his career all of a sudden decide I need to do something different to get ahead? Most people don't start taking performance enhancers in any sport until they feel like they need to do something to become a top level person, because it's been portrayed, hey, you're there but you're not quite there. Does that
Right.
make sense?
You're severely undersized.
Right. So I think just, man, and you could just see. I think the documentary did such a great job of showing the mental deterioration over time. He went from this really intense workaholic that had climbed the top of the mountain to he was just deteriorating in front of everybody's eyes. And to your point, for what you just said, you know, it was like this guy's always working. So the time he would need to mentally get into a better place or be, have the emotional or mental support he needs, it's gone because
Yeah, that
I,
training, that's that boat is sailed.
and then where you always were on the road or always were rooming or riding or working out with a particular person, and that guy's gone, and you're doing all those everyday mundane activities minus the person that adds to it. He was to me, he was telling everybody the way the documentary scene he made it seem. He was telling everybody, "I need help." Nobody stopped.
But
It
see,
was like,
and then this is another thing too, but I still don't think that they knew in either because from what Chavo Guerrero said, he kind of took on Eddie's role. Like he started traveling with Chris. They started getting more close and stuff like that. He stayed at Chris's house like a week or two before the murders happened.
"Yes, right, he did. He
So
very
this,
much did."
so I think Chris still wasn't comfortable going to a lot of different people. I think they just didn't know.
But
Didn't
that
understand.
that also goes into that relationship when you've been around a guy for 10
Right?
years or
Right.
more, in that capacity, you work with a person for 10, 15, however long it was, and then all of a sudden they're gone and somebody tries to work it takes time. It really does. And I think it just would over time it would have, but there were other things about this that,
I think it was other triggers too.
yep. Yep, and that's exactly it. And there still was that pressure there to be a top guy. Hey, I still have my work because he obviously they said he was very serious about what he did. He still wanted to be the main guy. I still have to put on the show. And the mental strain that went with that. And maybe it just was a little too much.
Hmm. Yeah. Maybe it was just too much to handle all at once. I mean, it was a year and a half, right? Like a year and a
Yeah.
half. So
I
it's
it's almost like it seems shorter than in the documentary that between the time that Eddie Guerrero died and the time that he ended up dying. Uh, but as the documentary goes on in the second part, they keep hard, like they basically just that whole second part was just showing his mental deterioration or whatnot and how he just broke down and like
yeah,
he just to see him like that, almost like I talked about in the first episode where you saw his human side and how he was with his kids to it's almost the exact reverse of that. To see him like that in the second episode was just like mind blowing. And it's crazy because when you put two and two together, did, is it just me or did you have that moment where you was like, I was watching this guy on TV every week while this was going on, and I never got that vibe.
right. Because it's like you wouldn't know he seemed his normal self about business, and he was still able to perform
Still putting
at
on
a
great matches.
put on great matches. But you would have never known that he was going to Eddie Guerrero's house, crying in his bed, and then going into upstairs to Eddie's gym and crying in the gym and just having all these breakdowns. You wouldn't have known that because he seemed normal. He still put on great matches. So it's like this. These were things that no one could could know because it's just like, well, he seemed normal. So the only people that knew were the people that was close to him. And I think his wife
Yeah.
was the only one that really knew
Well,
what
Eddie
was going on.
Guerrero's wife knew too, and I
Yeah,
think they kind of, but nobody really knew what to do.
yeah. That's because they really thought the journal thing was helping. So and they saw him writing in it, so they were like, okay, it's just probably gonna take some time. It's just he at least he's writing in it. That's progress. He's writing in it. So let's see what happens.
And
And
I think that writing actually probably was a catalyst for making things worse
I think
because
so.
yeah, well, I think by him listing these things and putting them on paper, right? Because isn't it at one point in time they talked about and refresh me on this? he said something in there about him wanting to join him.
And he said he'll join him soon.
Yeah, yeah, and that see those were like, oh man, like the second episode was tough for me. As excited and intrigued as I was by the first, I was equally intrigued, but then it took me to a place that I was like, man, like this guy, as great as he was really battling some demons here. And it's like he was
Serious.
going, yeah, some serious ones. And while also, we keep going back to this, battling these demons while also still putting on great matches, still performing at a high level. It's
Yeah.
unreal.
It was definitely grounds for insanity to be on the road like that and still not, because that's being on the road. That's a constant reminder of
Yep.
what you lost.
Yep.
He might have woken up some days thinking, okay, let me call Eddie so we go work out. Oh wait, can't.
You can't call them. And that puts you further and further into the hole until you just can't come back.
Right. That's why
And
I was
so,
saying he probably shouldn't have been on the fucking road for a while.
yeah. And so they finally get to the actual incident in question. And, I still can remember every major wrestler that I've heard about dying. I can still remember, how I was. I may not necessarily remember where, but I remember when Owen Hart died,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember watching Good Morning America that morning and seeing the Hart family, and I couldn't believe what the fuck had happened. I didn't recognize it to the magnitude that they talk about it in the Dark Side of the Ring episode, which we will be covering at a
Yeah,
later
we will.
date. Yeah, so stay tuned for that. That's a quick plug, but I remember that and the significance of it, and because I can remember because as a kid I'm 6 7 years old, and I'm like, well, fuck, are they gonna cancel WWF because this was at the height of the Attitude Era, and that was significant. I can remember when Eddie Guerrero died. That was significant. And when I found out that Macho Man had a fucking heart attack and hit a tree, I was watching ESPN Sports Center that morning. I still remember this because it was almost breaking news, and it was on like Good Morning America, if I'm not mistaken, when I seen this. And it was all I remember was they said he was dead. And the first thing that I thought about was, you know, fuck, he had a heart attack like Eddie Guerrero did. Like, what the fuck? Because most of the time that's how wrestlers died. They had a heart attack or something happened, but never to the level that this was. And then the show goes into detail on how, he didn't show up at a show. And WWE was like that was out of character for him, so they sent somebody to look for him and to do a wellness check. And so then the cops talk about how when they get there and everything, like what they find. And I mean,
Horrific.
yeah,
Just horrific.
it's
They said they smelled it before they even got to it.
so the theory is he killed his wife first and his son and sat there with them for a few days and then finally killed himself. Am I right?
Yeah, they believe that he killed his wife Friday night after an argument after they had a barbecue, and he killed his son the very next morning, which is a Saturday, and they believe that he killed himself. He stayed in there with their bodies until the next day. Then he killed himself on Sunday morning.
Yeah. And that part of it was tough.
It was,
Uh,
and I actually remember how I found out about it. Matter of fact, we found out at school. We went to the same high school
you're
with
right.
everybody out
We
there. We
did.
found out
Yes,
at
we yeah,
school. It was like
and
at the end
yeah.
of the day, and it came from somebody that usually always lies. He was a friend of ours, and he usually you couldn't really trust him. And he was like, "Chris Benoit died." We were like, "No, he didn't. No, he didn't." So somehow we got a hold of a computer or somebody saw it on the phone. And sure enough, it said on there Chris Benoit died on WWE.com. We were like, what the fuck?
And so I think when we found out, it wasn't god damn it, it wasn't Good Morning America. I think it was ABC. Fuck, it was like Nightline or something when we found out, because they did a more in-depth story and they started talking
Yeah,
about it.
that night.
Yeah, and when they got to talking about that, man, even as a kid, it just kind of shook me to my core to even think about, because he hung himself,
Right.
or whatnot. And I mean, I'm not gonna go into detail because it's very graphic, it's very disturbing. To hear, but it was part of the story. That was the whole purpose of the documentary. But if you want more detail, you obviously need to watch it if you haven't seen it already. But I just, even watching it now in my adult life, it still shakes me. It shakes
Yeah,
me sitting here talking about it, because the guy he was great, and then for him to go through this mental and emotional deterioration and detachment to whatever set him off. And that's the thing that really resonates with me. You will never fucking know. You'll never know.
you definitely
Nobody
have
will.
people who have like some insights of it. I do have a theory from hearing different things from people who have talked to him. I mean, and then things from the documentary. Apparently, him and Nancy were having problems. You remember they showed the text messages and things like that.
Yeah.
Her saying she wanted him to retire and all that stuff because it's just too much for him. I believe they got into an argument because Chris told someone that another wrestler, I forgot who it was. Oh my gosh, he did a shoot interview and I forgot who it was. But he said that he had been through a divorce before and he didn't want to go through it again because his first wife like really put him through a lot in that divorce and he didn't want to go through it again.
Right.
I feel like that night they got into an argument. She said she was gonna leave him. She was gonna take the son. I think his I think his anger got the best of him and he completely snapped and lost it and killed her. Then when he realized what he did, he was like, "Oh fuck, oh shit." He was like, "Well, let me just go ahead and kill my son." Then he did himself, and I hope the son didn't witness his mother getting killed.
See, and I thought about that when they were explaining the documentary. I was like, "Fuck, that's fucked up." And again, like I said, this is very deep, and I had to kind of hit pause for a second on the episode, because again, this is somebody really I enjoy watching them do what they do. It's almost like, you form a bond and a connection with people. Like I think my favorite wrestler of all time was The Rock, and having to sit there and watch something like that, say if it was about, you almost form some type of connection with these people when you see them week in and week out, or whatnot. And again, to your point, kayfabe was not yet dead when we were still,
Right.
so to us, it resonated deeper. I think nowadays, if we were to hear something like this, it would probably hit home, but not to the degree, because a lot of people were shook. It was almost the same thing with Eddie Guerrero. It touched you in a different way, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's really, really troublesome and hard to, you know to think about and to go through. But I thought the documentary did a good job, or whatnot. Now, and I think they even talked about how when after he died and they did an autopsy on his brain, he was suffering from CTE too, of some type or whatnot, if I'm not mistaken. And I was gonna ask you, do you think? And I think they talked about this in the documentary. Do you think all those years of doing the flying headbutts and the chair shots that he took, and the constant impact from the moves and everything, do you think that somehow might have played a part into, like, a lot of this stuff?
I believe so because you remember his headbutts were brutal, and he
They
always
were.
hurt
He
himself on
always
it.
hurt himself. Yeah, exactly. But that move has it has a bad history. Hell, Harley Race did it, and he told people not to do it. And Dynamite Kid did it, and he's in a wheelchair. And Chris Benoit did it, and he's dead. And it's like, and you notice you don't really see it anymore like you used to. You know,
Yeah, that's after that people started like really banning it. The only person I never really knew to have a problem with it, and I don't know, maybe he didn't let it on, was Bam Bam Bigelow, because you remember he used to do that move too,
yeah,
and I didn't really see anything from him on that. But
yeah,
yeah, I
no,
definitely attribute that to. But the only thing with CTE, they usually kill themselves, and I think he was gonna commit suicide anyway. That's why I think just the whole dispute between him and his wife really took it to a whole nother level. I think he was
yeah,
gonna do himself anyway, but that was just, I don't know, man. I don't know. It was
yeah.
just it's a whole messy thing.
And as we get to the end of the documentary, after they talked about that, I felt bad for his son, because his son talks about how he became known as the son of the guy who killed his wife and his son, and killed himself. He wore that stigma for a long time. And also it was interesting because even though her sister was very heartbroken because they were really close, and she obviously didn't want anything to do with his son, his older son, because of what went on, because that was still something she had to deal with. And I thought it was a really cool moment how Chris Jericho was able to bring them together and tell them, hey, you guys are still family and you both went through something traumatic together. And I think doing this has given you, and there was that touching moment at the end of the show where they were able to hug and kind of talk to each other and let them know, hey, we're family and things like that. I thought that part kind of really put a bow on it, and was able to wrap it up pretty nice after going through all of that and getting to that point.
Yeah, that was the best part of the documentary for me. That was the part that really kind of touched me, because it was like for her to be saying like, I always wanted to talk to them and stuff, but just the family was getting in the way, saying this about them and them saying this about us. Like, it's just a lot of messiness, and just the fact that they were able to bring it back together and go to a show together.
Yeah, I gotta give kudos to Chris Jericho for that. I thought that was a really cool moment to wrap that up. And Chris Jericho has been a big advocate, even when it wasn't popular, for Chris Benoit and how good he was. And I've listened to him on podcasts talk about how he didn't care. He still, he still thinks Chris Benoit is one of the greatest to ever do what he did. And that what he did in this instance shouldn't necessarily, it's wrong, it's dead wrong, it's awful, but it shouldn't take away from his body of work. So I thought it was cool for Chris Jericho to be the one to facilitate this, because he's been a huge Benoit advocate for years. Even when WWE made it, and I want to talk about that. When obviously we're going along with this, but again, this was a really big. It was a lot to unpack in these first two episodes. But I want to talk about this, and then we'll hit the last thing and we'll close it out. So obviously, you remember when he first died, WWE covered, the death, and they did the salute, and they talked about how they were very saddened about what happened. Then they found out, and Vince McMahon comes out with the "You'll never hear his name on this program ever again," and he was blackballed.
Yeah, he was definitely erased from history.
Yeah,
But
you
it
can't.
didn't
They
really
won't even
stop
mention
the
his
media
name.
storm, though. It didn't stop the
Right,
media storm, because
right,
they
and
were
they
on the news for the next few months.
and I didn't get what that was going to solve. And to be honest, again, what he did, yes, I get it. Terrible, awful. I don't deny that. But how many other people had done something maybe not as egregious, but there were plenty of other things going on around there, plenty of drug use and everything else over the years, and
Right?
they never quite came out and said, "Oh, we don't condone this. You'll never
Hmm.
hear this name." So they never said nothing. But
Yeah.
I don't know why this particular incident they chose to do that, and that's always been a curiosity to me.
It's because they were getting so much pressure, even more pressure than when The whole thing with Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura back in the day, the whole steroid scandal.
Yeah.
They got even more media attention from this one because a child was involved. I think the whole thing was the fact that uh, it wasn't just one wrestler killing himself or committing an act. He he killed his whole family, and
Yeah.
one of them was a child. And I feel like them knowing the details of the scene and the whole crime in itself just made it even worse. Made
Yeah.
it even worse.
That's a good point.
For a lot of people, how he did his wife alone was just they were like, "Are you serious?" He pretty much broke her back, and just all the details. It because as I remember, more and more details kept coming as the days went on. Because initially, I watched that tribute show on Raw, and after Raw, immediately after Raw, I went on WWE.com, and then they said double murder, suicide, and I was like, what the hell? What? Wait, are they saying that he did it or did his wife? I still didn't think he did. I thought his wife did it because I'm thinking of her as woman, the crazy woman in WCW.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, did he do it? I mean, did she do it? So, but then they said he did it. I was like, what the fuck? Like, even
Man,
though,
yeah.
yeah, I didn't, man, I was like, what the fuck? So as it kept going on and on, they seemed like they interviewed everyone from the wrestling industry. You remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, it was constantly on the news for months, like all the way until the toxicology reports
Reports.
came
Yeah.
out. 'Cause they were
And
like, what the fuck?
I'm sure they were doing damage control, but it just was like, okay, this sucks. And because of that, he's been kept out of the Hall of Fame. And that's what I want to get to. After I watched that and stuff, and I think it came up in the episode, I can't remember. But and I asked this to the audience, if you've gotten this far in the episode that we're doing tonight, and we love your feedback. It's the same thing with Owen Hart. Does Chris Benoit deserve to be in the Hall of Fame? Can we say enough? Art, his art and his life are separate. What he did in life should not negate his life's work. The should he be in the Hall of Fame?
It's still a tricky one too, because it's so political with Hall of Fames. Just based off his wrestling ability and things he accomplished, especially for small men, for the little
Yeah.
man, that that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. But it's just when you committed an unforgivable act, it's just like no one, no one will put you in their Hall of
Put you
Fame.
in there.
It's gonna
Yeah.
taint it. It's gonna taint it. Now, one can also argue as well, because this is another thing I'm pretty sure we're going to cover another episode of Dark Side of the Ring about Jimmy Snuka. I mean, pretty much everything
He
was,
got in and he killed allegedly killed somebody. That's
and
how
then
the episode made it seem.
and
I
then
I had heard the story.
not only that, his daughters in the promotion, all they did was take her last name away. That's it. But he's still in there, and the way he did that was brutal too.
Allegedly, yes.
And
I mean,
also, let's take it further. Let's just keep on going. Our most popular episode of Dark Side of the Ring was Bruce Brody.
Brody. Yeah.
Now, one of the people involved in that thing was Carlos Colon, and he's in the WWE Hall of Fame. So it's kind of like it's hypocritical of them because they don't want him in the Hall of Fame, but you still have his
Well,
matches
it was
on
the
WWE
same
Network.
thing with it, but it's like yeah, the matches are still on the
It's just
network.
labeled singles matches.
Yeah, they
That's
are
it.
still on the network. Like you can still go and see it. I don't care how you try to politically correctly sanitize it. The guy is still there, which leads me to add. And I get it. Oh, you put a guy in the Hall of Fame that killed his wife and kid. I get that. But you've also, to your point, and I was gonna say they put other people in for far more for that's done almost just as egregious of a thing. There are plenty of people in there or whatnot that have done stuff. Well, up until recently, one person couldn't get in because of what their profession was after wrestling.
Yeah.
They had to find a way to ease them in.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that's fair. I don't think she should have been grouped in.
Well, I mean, her contribution to the sport was fucking like highly impactful. But
right.
They said that what she did after fully overshadowed that. And I mean that to me was hypocritical. You had people posing for Playboy.
So yeah, you had people posing for Playboy. Fucking Sunny. I mean, this is after she got inducted, but she did porno too, and she sold her ring. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but that's a different case. I think they kind of already knew what they were getting into with that. But yeah, they picking. It's the Hall of Fame process for me with them is very weird. I mean, to this day right now, I don't think the Dudleys are in, if I'm not mistaken, and I think that's because of some rift that they had.
Yeah, they went in. You said
they
the
finally got
Dudleys?
in. Yeah.
Yeah, the Dudleys went in last year.
Is Big Papa Scott Steiner in?
No, he's never gonna be in. He
You know
hates
what I'm
Triple
saying?
H.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be about that. Even if he doesn't show up, the guy's still one of the greatest. He's one of the greatest part of the greatest tag team of all
I
time.
think the
One of
Steiner
them.
brothers should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
Steiner brothers, that's a great team. I think they should be in the Hall of Fame. I do. But
And
far
he
as
hates Triple H for what he
with his
did to him.
guts. Yeah, but I mean Triple H was being an asshole.
Well, yeah, at that time he was, and I'm sure he'll tell you that, and he don't mind owning up to it. But and CM Punk's not in the Hall of Fame. Probably he'll never get in.
Probably not, but it's in their best interest to keep that sweet. I don't even think he gives a damn. Tell you the
No,
truth.
he don't. And that's the truth. Most people don't give a fuck. But for a diehard fan, especially of somebody that was great because you've seen them growing up in the golden age of wrestling, it resonates. It breaks my heart that Owen Hart's not in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, but after seeing that Dark Side of the Ring episode, I understand why.
Oh, definitely understand.
And I feel like it's related to the Benoit thing too, in the sense of I don't even think Benoit's family would even accept it after the way they've felt like they've been treated.
He's an outcast. You can
Absolutely.
never mention his name anywhere, and that's the part that sucks.
They treated his son wrong when his son just wants to come backstage at the shows and
they won't
talk to people.
He's a pariah, and because of that, that's the part that really hits home for me. Is this guy did so much and contributed so much. I mean, him and the Radicals paved the way for small people in the WWE, or whatnot. Them and Chris Jericho coming in at a time when they did, it kind of changed the guard. That's when you started seeing different stuff. And again, I just, it's the same question as you have with most, famous or celebrities or entertainers or athletes that contributed something big. Should art and life be combined or should they be separate? And that's one of those things that you just, again, you can't even mention his name. It's almost like it's become taboo in wrestling, period, to mention his name. People are, well, how dare you? But you can't take away from the fact that the guy was good. And it's like when you bring up how good he was and people think about it, oh, yeah, he was great. That means something. Now what he did, that it was despicable. And whether he realized it or didn't, we'll never know. But you look at all of that stuff that the documentary covered in that first episode, and you're kind of like, well, goddamn, from a wrestling perspective, this dude really was something. He really was something.
Yeah, they can also go into the thing. I'm pretty sure this is what they'll say. Well, if his career is that great, he's the one who fucked it up. It's on him. It's not
Yeah.
really on them for not putting him in the Hall of Fame. He fucked that
Right.
up. The moment he
Right.
decided to strangle his wife and suffocate the son and pull a bitch move like that, if you were gonna be a pussy and just take your own life, you could have did that yourself. But you had to be a pussy and take two people with you that
Yep.
it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it depends on who you ask and how they feeling.
Right.
I get where you're coming from. Yeah.
Yeah. So
But
it's that's a controversial thing. I think they went that route because they'll get a lot less
black.
bullshit from people. Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
less flack from people if they just banish him from it completely than trying to fight for his legacy.
Or advocate for why he should. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I understand that. Well, man, let's wrap this up. What did you think of the documentary? And I mean,
Oh, of course, I loved it. Dark Side of the Ring is always good. It never disappoints.
it never disappoints. It never disappoints. And we hope that we didn't disappoint you guys with this episode. Again, there was so much to unpack in this, and we know it's fairly lengthy. If you have not seen it, we highly recommend that you do. Vice TV's Dark Side of the Ring, the Chris Benoit story, is the first two episodes in season 2. And again, it's a lot. It's very detailed. I think to me, it's the best. It's the best episode or episodes they've ever done. And they've done
Yeah.
a lot of good, even a lot of good episodes, especially in the second season. But
Yeah.
if I had to pick one to watch, it would be that one. You know, I highly recommend it along with the others. And again, we will be doing more episodes on the second season and what they covered. And there were 10 episodes or whatnot this year, so we got a lot more to unpack and bring you. And hopefully, if you like something, let us know. If you don't like some, if you want to chime in on anything we discussed as far as Chris Benoit, whether he should be in the Hall of Fame or shouldn't, and why, feel free to comment. Hit us on Twitter. Is it best damn WP? It's been a
No,
while.
that's the Instagram. The Instagram is best damn WP. The Twitter is damn_podcast.
There you go. Been a while. So hit us
Yes,
on
yeah.
Twitter. Yeah. Hit us on Twitter at damn_podcast. Let us know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and notification button so that you keep up with everything that we post. And again, we hope.
And check out our t-shirt.
T-shirts
on Teespring.
On Teespring. Yeah, on Teespring. If you haven't got one, get one. We got all kinds of design styles and everything else. Feel free.
You're not spending $20 for a shirt with us. No, sir.
Nope.
No, sir. We're not breaking the bank.
But again, to close this out, we hope that you have enjoyed this. We hope everybody's staying safe, and we look forward to bringing you something again real soon. But until next time, this has been the Best Damn Wrestling Podcast, and we'll catch you next time.